So I'm going to tell you a story today. English majors like me like to tell stories, so that's what I'm going to do. The context of the story comes from something that I talked about with you back in the fall convocation in August. Seems like a long time ago, when I introduced the subject of kindness for the theme for the fall convocation. And by the way, this is like the first day of National Random Act of Kindness Week. If you didn't know that, it is. And kindness is one of those Christian virtues that we need to be thinking about. There are many Christian virtues. And the whole mission of Biola is to provide you this biblically centered education, scholarship service, preparing you in mind and character. This is the character part, to make an impact in the world for Christ. And since that time that I talked to you back in August, I have increasingly been nauseated by cultural and political meanness. And I think it's time for kindness to trump meanness. But one warning for those of us who are willing to live the more radical way of kindness, and that is sometimes our kindness is rejected, it's rebuffed. And the life of kindness is not living to be accepted, it's actually living to be obedient. It demands me to open up to people I otherwise wouldn't open up to, people who are different, whose different beliefs or culture or norms are far different than my own background. Kindness calls me to press into that. And if we're kind simply to receive kindness back, then our kindness is going to wither when it gets the stiff arm, right? But if we can be so bold as to allow our kindness to flow from us and not expect it to be returned, it may or may not, then the true power of God-sized kindness will be unleashed in us. Then we are obeying Christ, who called us in Matthew 10 to make ourselves receivable, though we may not always be received. Actually, Paul talks about it too. He says that you are the aroma of Christ. And he goes on to say that some people who notice our fragrance, this Jesus smell that we have, they're going to be repelled. And others are going to be drawn to Christ. But either way, we need to keep smelling like Jesus. His kindness is one of the ways in which we smell like Jesus. And maybe through our life of kindness, we're going to be received. Maybe we won't. But if you're like me, you want your kindness to be welcomed, right? You want your kindness not to be rejected, but kindness doesn't always get a thank you. It often elicits no words of gratitude. Sometimes it does the absolute opposite of what we intended it to do. But even still, Jesus calls us to this powerful, radical, authentic way of kindness. This is what he says. He says, love your enemies. Do good to them and lend to them without expecting to get anything back, even if it's not received. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because God is kind to the ungrateful. Jesus says, I, Barry Corey, like to be kind to the grateful. Christ calls us to be kind to the ungrateful, to be kind in such a way that we don't expect to get anything back. And this is the audacity of biblical kindness. I recall one evening long ago, the subtle and unforeseen feeling of rejection, of kindness snubbed. As a graduate student in Boston in my late 20s, I needed a job to help pay the rent for the apartment that I shared with a school teacher and a medical school resident. And around the corner from our apartment stood a low-income, high-rise unit for families who couldn't afford to buy their own place or didn't have enough money to pay the rent in the city. The local housing authority tried to keep the place clean. They'd paint over the graffiti, they'd replace the broken windows. But all the Band-Aids that it had, it still looked like the projects. The places suburbanites like me typecast as ghetto. I frequently drove by, but I never stopped in. But one day I saw this posting for a job. The city was hiring tutors to work with disadvantaged public school children. So I applied, I interviewed, I got the job, and I showed up for my first day of work, and my job site was that low-income, high-rise apartment. So I pulled my Subaru wagon into the parking spot. The weeds were growing recklessly between the asphalt cracks. And I sat tight for a few minutes, not knowing what was about to begin in my life. The sign on the first floor community hall read these words, said, "Homework Help Room." And minutes earlier, the students had descended the single Otis elevator with their backpacks and their questions. And by the time I walked in, there were a few other tutors, and like me, they were doing what no one else in these kids' homes could or would do. The room full of elementary school students, they were African American, they were Hispanic, they were white, and for the most part, life for these children in the cinder block apartments was this daily grind. Single-parent households eked out a living with no margin. Many of these kids were latchkey children coming home from school alone before their mom or dad or guardian got off work. If any adult was at home, the interest or the ability wasn't there when the 4th or 5th graders needed help with their spelling or their math or their social studies. So I made it through the first night and then the second. I finished a week, and then 2, and before long, week after week with 3 other tutors, I was easily floating from table to table, dutifully, and I might add joyfully, helping these kids with their homework. So when they aced quizzes or tests or got everything right, we'd exchange these high fives. So
way to go.
Awesome. Over time, I felt like I was becoming an important part of their world, but even more, they were becoming an important part of mine. Especially one student. Corey came to the homework help room every day. He was 11, had a kind heart once I got through his aloof veneer. He lived many floors up with his mother and his siblings. To the best of my knowledge, no father ever posed for family photos. I'd quiz Corey on his geography and places that were truly foreign to him, like France or Indonesia, let alone Rocky Mountains or Mississippi River. Corey's geography was his neighborhood, the rough and tumble, the hard scrabble place where he lived, occasionally stretching out to Boston's subways or bus routes. After months of tutoring Corey at the low-income high-rise, I gradually waded into his personal life. I began to sense he was warming to me. Talked about his mother, who worked every day. He liked some of his subjects, others in school not so much. He wanted to know about my girlfriend and me. More than anything, though, Corey told me about his Little League baseball team, how much he loved to play ball. And there I sat, listening to someone's son who loved baseball, never anticipating that years later I'd have a son, who I'd take across the country, stopping at America's ballparks. But this wasn't happening for Corey. I spent weeks of building trust with him, asking him question after question, and finally, he took the risk of inviting me into his world outside of the homework help room.
Would you come watch me play baseball sometime?
Corey asked, explaining that his mother, who worked odd hours, hardly made any of his games. When I told him I'd be there, he didn't like give me a high five or a fist pump or flash some glistening smile, but I did sense that he was glad that someone would come to be his advocate, his cheerleader at his game. Someone would be at his game to yell his name when he stepped into the batter's box or threw the runner out at first.
You're out of there!
Christian, by the way, is helping me over here. Love it. Corey needed someone to be there, making sure his baseball games wouldn't become his unwitnessed moments. When the game was over, he wanted to be with someone who could recount his plays and affirm him as a gifted boy, encouraging him over an ice cream. Paul and I were dating then, and on that game night, we showed up at the City Little League field. We brought a blanket, sandwiches, sat by the first base dugout to cheer our hearts out for Corey. As the players arrived, I yelled something like, "Hey, Corey, good luck." I wanted him to hear me, to know I was there. Paula did too. Our single intent that night was to be his fan. We'd cheer him up if he struck out. We'd cheer him on if he got on base. Our focus was simply one player, this 11-year-old African-American kid wearing his baseball pants and pounding his fist into his glove as he warmed up for the game. He half smiled when he noticed me, acknowledging me in this upward nod as if the string was pulling his head backwards. His teammates began throwing balls back and forth and taking swings at these phantom pitches with their aluminum Louisville sluggers. It was time for the game to start. But the weird thing is it kept not starting. Players continued to keep practicing, playing catch back and forth as coaches from both sides huddled around the chain link fence. More time passed and still no play ball call from the umpire. In fact, as I looked around, actually there was no umpire. One of Corey's coaches came over to Paula and me, not knowing which team we preferred or which player we knew.
Do you know how to call balls and strikes?
Huh?
The umpire didn't show up, and we can't have a game without an ump. Do you think you might be able to officiate our game?
I respond, I've umped a few softball games.
Thank you. We really need you out there. Here's what you do. Stand behind the pitcher's mound, not home plate, and you have to make all the calls. Strike zone is knees to numbers, and we play 7 innings. The rest of the rules are fairly basic if you know baseball.
So I took the coach's word that no ump meant no game. So I reluctantly agreed. I say reluctantly, but actually there's a spike of self-importance when I was asked to take on this newly assigned position to adjudicate on this field of 10 and 11-year-old boys. If I was going to be the ump, right, I was going to make sure that these coaches and players and families were trusted with my integrity of the game, and that I'd be a leader, I'd be impartial, I'd be imposing, I'd be powerful, I'd be absolute in my decisions, because that's what umpires do. That's what they do. So I looked at Paula with a bit of pride at being the one selected, albeit from a rather deficient pool. She shook her head as I got up from the blanket and I headed to the field. I abandoned my date for the next hour to respond to the civic call of duty to be the big Little League magistrate. Moments later, I stood behind the 5'1" hurler starting on the mound for the team opposing Corey's. It did cross my mind that Corey was the reason why I was there. I didn't come to be his umpire, I came to be his supporter. My role had unexpectedly changed. I can't recall everything that happened that led up to the final inning, but that's when I stopped enjoying my role as the judge. And I wished I'd stayed on the blanket as the boyfriend and the fan. Those of you who know baseball, you follow with me on this. Corey's team was ahead by a run, and the opposing team was at bat in the bottom of the 7th, which was the last inning in Little League, and there were a few men on base. I use the word men loosely. All I remember is that the batter hit the ball to the outfield, the fielder dropped it, and the at-bat team scored 2 runs to take the lead and therefore win the game. And because of this ensuing cacophony of hollers, everything after that got rather muddled. At first I thought the noise was the excitement for the runners rounding the base, going home, winning the game, but I realized that the yelling was coming from both dugouts, from one side and also from Corey's dugout, housing the team that had just lost. The screams were not for the runner. They were at the ump. They're actually yelling at me.
He threw the bat! The batter threw the bat! He should have been called out! The runs don't count!
By now the other team was involved in the protest too, yelling back at me that the batter didn't throw the bat. So I was looking back and forth at both dugouts while the ballpark awaited my call. There was absolutely no more order on this dusty diamond on that Boston Little League field where I was presiding. my 7-inning reign was absolutely crumbling, and my rule was coming into question. And though it was just a few seconds, it seemed like hours passed as the spectators and teams shouted their interpretation of the event. And I know I looked frazzled. I didn't look composed as umpires should look. And I heard this disharmonized chorus of sopranos from little leaguers and mothers, and baritones from coaches and fathers, and they were all awaiting my call and telling me what my call should be. And I had to make a decision, and whatever decision I made, one team was going to win and one team was going to lose, and I, the judge, had to give the verdict. So any popularity that I had been enjoying up to that point as the officiating justice of a rather uneventful game was now history. Yelling and gesticulating, people on both sides of the base path stared and awaited my call. I looked at Paula over there on the blanket for help, or at least for sympathy, and I got neither. She was reading a book, oblivious. I did know, though, that if the batter throws the bat, he's out. But the problem was I didn't see it. I was the only umpire. So you understand my plight, right? Being the only umpire, I was watching the outfielder dropping the ball, not the batter throwing the bat. So I latched onto some phrase that I had heard before, but I actually never used. And I said to the angry crowd waiting for my opinion, I said, I call him like I see him. I didn't see it, so I can't call it. The batter is safe. The runs score, the game's over. So I allowed the runs to score, not willing to compromise my fairness by the protests that would come. And it was official. Corey's team lost.
We lost, no fair. We should have won, but we lost. It's all because of that wannabe ump.
The backlash was actually more than I expected. These dozen or so halfway to manhood boys on Corey's team displayed no respect for my judgment, muttering how unfair and disrespecting my leadership was. The thing is, I hadn't asked for any of this, right? I looked to the dugout, and the coach who had begged me to bail him out an hour earlier was shaking his head, muttering under his breath about my incompetence. I overheard someone in the crowd say something to the effect of,
"Hey, ump, you stink!"
Thankfully, it wasn't Paula. The entire evening became this rebuff on my goodwill. My act of kindness was derailed. Protests of disapproval from one dugout, cheers of victory from the other, left me standing there alone in this clamor of yells. Not soon enough, the teams, they packed their stuff, they headed out, field emptied. I stood alone behind the pitcher's mound. I wanted to be the last one to exit that night. No one thanked me, no honorarium, no invitations to ump again, no goodbyes. Even Corey left without saying a word to the only two fans who came simply to see him play that evening. Corey went home, so we didn't have a chance to take him out for ice cream to replay the game's highlights and for Paula and me to affirm his baseball skills. She and I headed for the car, and all the happiness that accompanied me to the game was nowhere to be found. And I felt unappreciated, and my kindness went unthanked. But thankfully, it was like this short-lived misery, right? A few days later, I was back working with Corey on his math, giving him attaboys, and watching him smile when he got the answers right. I tell you this story, by the way, the story's over. Not as some parable, and certainly not as some pivotal point in my life. I'm actually willing to bet. Actually, we don't bet at Biola. I'm willing to prophesy. No one remembers that game. No one who was there, except for maybe Paula and me. But I just want to tell you that simple story to underscore the point that sometimes our kindness can be rebuffed. And when kindness is rebuffed, it's still kindness. For kindness has far more to do with how we live than how others respond. And if I'm the kind only for the thank yous on the other side, then kindness it just simply becomes my need for affirmation. Kindness is actually one-way goodness. And sometimes kindness receives no thank you or returned favor or even a response. And there have been times in my life when people have been profoundly kind to me, when out of my own selfishness or arrogance, I've shown them no gratitude. Kindness is easy to show the coffee barista when she gets your latte right. Kindness comes naturally to our family so long as there's harmony. But kindness is much harder for those we might have previously ignored or avoided or judged or condemned. Kindness is a tougher road when we live in tension with family members or on our residence halls. Try walking the way of kindness then. The way of kindness is a way of life, and I've got a long way to go. But if over time we keep on pressing into kindness as an act of obedience, it becomes this habit of our heart, and it leads us to understand the difference between the episode of loving our neighbor and the lifestyle of loving our neighbor. Kindness is not a random act. It is a radical life, and it's the life that Jesus calls you to. But venturing into kindness, it's hard, it's countercultural, it's risky, it's unsafe, it's difficult. And though the life of kindness is good, our kindness is sometimes awkward, it's sometimes unwelcomed. It's admitting our own messiness and our own imperfections in order to invite others in. And sometimes that invitation, it's ignored. Sometimes it's declined. Sometimes our kindness even gets the fist or the finger. In its authenticity, kindness chances rejection. And it's a tough challenge for the more cautious or proud among us, like me, to live the way of selfless kindness. The kind life is the vulnerable life. There's no charades in kindness. And kindness isn't weakness. So if we fear rejection because it's an affront to our pride, our kindness is going to be timid. But if we're honest in who we are and we can persevere through the rejections that might come, we are living this higher dimension of kindness. And Paul says in Romans 2 that it's a mysterious thing, that the kindness of God through us leads to repentance. The point of being kind to friends and to foes is not to be respected or received or befriended. The point is to be respectful and receivable and friendly so that Christ's loving kindness flows through us, and through that we have the best possibility of being received. So I learned a word in a philosophy class a long time ago that I haven't heard since. The word is eudaimonism. I don't know why I still remember it, but I remember the philosophy professor talking about it. Because when he talked about it, I think he was describing some part of my own life and my own depravity. Eudaimonism is the act of doing something virtuous in order for those who notice to think more highly of me. I suppose this is all called you can also call it feigned compassion or the humble brag, right? This is eudaimonism. And when I stop doing the kind thing because I don't feel appreciated, or it's not making me feel more important, I'm really not doing the kind thing at all. And quite honestly, this is my struggle. Sometimes my kindness is noticed by the grateful. Sometimes it's not acknowledged at all. And so this is what Jesus said to his disciples in Luke chapter 10 as he was sending the 72 out. He cautioned them that sometimes they would enter towns where their kindness wouldn't be received. Sometimes the good news that they were eager to tell or the miraculous things that they were empowered to do, sometimes they'd be rejected. And Jesus anticipated this, and he prepared them for rejection. And in calling them to solidarity with him, whose profound kindness on the cross would be rejected by many, Jesus says to his followers, whoever rejects you rejects me. And whoever rejects me rejects the one who sent me. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop trying. Our kindness may be rejected. Somehow, through God's grace, we need to get used to the fact that we may be rejected. We need to get over it. Cold water may be thrown on our acts of mercy, but kindness is not about how we are received. It's about how we make ourselves receivable. So let your kindness flow. And when others express gratitude, be thankful. But if others ignore or reject your kindness, don't let it beat you down. Keep being kind as an act of Christ-like obedience. Keep smelling like Jesus. And I'm telling you this, students, and for you prospective students, feel free to eavesdrop on this. This is what we do at Biola. Because more than ever, in an increasingly polarized, vitriolic, and mean-spirited culture, you need to be the antidote. Kindness is being strong in your biblical convictions, but gracious in your character. So go and live the way of kindness, biblical kindness, in a way that is mercy-filled and reverent and God-fearing. Kindness is a dimension of God's grace through you. It's not weak. It is fierce and it is passionate. And kindness is not the intuitive way. But Jesus calls us to demonstrate the power of kindness to all who come our way, neighbor or stranger, girlfriend or brother, colleague or enemy or roommate. And more profoundly, kindness calls us to the risk of encountering people with disease, or those living outside of grace, or even those who would threaten to harm or destroy us. What does kindness look like when we extend it to our enemies, or to the outcast, the bullied, or the lonely, the unsavory, or the unlovely? What does it look like to be kind to the persecutors of Christians, not just the persecuted? What does it look like to extend profound kindness to the nations? You are children of the promise. God promised Abraham that his people would be a blessing to the nations, and that blessing would come through you. In this room, we have future CEOs and surgeons and filmmakers and attorneys and educators and counselors and pastors and healthcare workers and politicians and social entrepreneurs and artists and storytellers and on and on. And you will be a community of leaders, leaders of businesses, leaders of communities, leaders of movements, maybe even leaders of nations. And wherever you go, and whatever you do, don't let up on your deeply held beliefs as a follower of Jesus. And this means you need to be full of truth, but also full of grace, convictions and mercy, firm center and soft edges. Kindness will go a long way in your life in building bridges, even with those who deeply disagree with you. The God-authored spirit of kindness in you has a power to upend the enemy and season the world around you for the good. Kindness, as Jesus lived it, offers the highest hope for a renewal of Christian civility, a renewal needed now more than ever. And remember, kindness, Paul writes, leads to repentance. Again, this is random act of kindness week, and despite the fact that I say kindness is not random, like I do some random acts of kindness. Outside here, actually today, there's some tables there and opportunities for you expressing kindness. So some people outside there that will tell you these are ways in which you can express kindness here in this community and beyond. I encourage you to stop by the table on your way out. God bless you. I love you. You're dismissed. Go in peace.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.